väldigt viktigt att ha en väldigt stor mobil. Hello everyone here in the room and everyone joining digitally. Welcome to this awesome event at Gbg Tech Week. We're going to listen into how you should succeed when entering a crowded market together with Mikael Eliasson from BookU. So before he starts, let's warm him up with some big applause, right?
Now it's on, I think. Yeah, great. So, as Elin said, I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can succeed in as a startup in a mature market, or it's really about a crowded market. It doesn't really matter if it's so mature or not. And my name is Mikael Eliasson. I'll come back a little bit more to who I am. But I really hope that you will get two things from this talk. I want to convey how incredibly important it is to get your positioning right when you are going into a crowded market. I think some of you have heard positioning, like seen this positioning statement, you just fill in 5 blanks and you're done. That's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to talk a different angle about positioning that I hope is a little bit easier to grasp why it really matters. And I also want you to start thinking about what can we do to get a stronger positioning in the long term. And there is one shift in how you think about product features and who you build your application for that makes a lot of difference. So I think this quote is relevant to this talk. For those who doesn't know, I didn't. Bobby Fischer is a chess grandmaster. And Warren Buffett had this quote where he says, how do you beat Bobby Fischer? You play him at any game but chess. I try to stay in games where I have an edge, and this is basically what I hope that we get to talk a bit about. How do you get an edge against the competition? Especially as a startup, you don't have the funds to compete with them heads-on most of the time. So, as I said, my name is Mikael Eliasson. I've been working at BookU for about 8 years now. It's a little bit unclear when we started. I was one of the founders there, and we started BookU, which is coming back to what we are talking about, positioning and stuff, what we have always said is that we are accounting software, and that's at least how we thought about it. And we started this company because we thought what was there 8 years ago was very cumbersome. It was not nice to use, it was not easy to understand, and it took a lot of time. So we thought we could do it better. And here we are 8 years afterwards and still trying to make it better. And I think we have gone a far got far on it, but we still have a lot of things to improve, and some of those learnings is what I plan to share here. So more than being a founder of the company, I work as a principal engineer on day-to-day basis, same time as product expert and team leader for one of our teams. And I have a background as freelancer, and that's where we came in contact with the bookkeeping from my side then. I started as a self-taught developer. I studied IT here at Chalmers for a while, but I actually dropped off my master and started to work instead. And I have done a few large products on my spare time too. I'm not going to go into those because those are very related to my other hobby, which is sport. So in my case, it's cycling, orienteering, or running. And orienteering is not super large, so I don't think most people will know about those projects. And I'm just going to say from the start that a lot of this builds on the ideas of two really great women, April Dunford and Katie Sierra. So I will share some link after this. If you think this sounds like something we should focus more on, then please go and listen to them later on, because they can explain this much more deep than I can do. But coming back to why we are here, there are 3 ways to take on the competition in any market. It doesn't matter if it's crowded or not. You can go heads-on, which is basically saying that I'm going to beat the rest of the competition by just doing what they do, but I'm going to do it better. And that can be a better implementation, it can be a faster implementation, it can be cheaper. You can try to win by spending more money on marketing than they do, or being better marketing. But the point is that you really don't have any advantage. Maybe your team is a little bit better, but you can't guarantee that stays over time. So it's a very risky business because they usually have more money than you have, especially if you are a startup. There's another way to do it, and it's specialization. You can decide to serve a subset of the market much better than the competition. So for us that are into accounting software, it could, for example, be that we decide to serve IT consultants very well. And we do the best possible solution for them, and then we just kind of skip the rest of the market for now. We could decide instead that it's people who own a store or have started their company very recently that is our best target group. And this allows you to be better than the competition in this segment, but you don't have to be better on everything, which means you can save in on product development time and so on. There is a third option that I'm not going to talk about so much today, and it's to create a new market category. This is hugely beneficial if you manage to do it, but it's really, really hard, and I think only companies that have a lot of money or already have a lot of attention from possible customers can go this way. The problem is that you need to educate all the users and customers that they actually need this new thing. At the same time, you need to build this new thing, and you need to explain to them why you are doing this thing better than anyone else. And if you don't have attention of the market, it's very hard to explain for them why they need it. So could be really good, but I think you need a good reason to go that way. So let's just go talk a little bit about why going heads-on is harder than ever before. The competitive landscape has exploded the last 10 years. There is this, I'm actually not sure what they are doing, this Chief Martech. They do the market technology landscape. And for 10 years or so, they have listed all possible solutions in different areas. And this was 2020. There was 8,000 solutions in their landscape. Exactly how they count and who they count is not the interesting part. It's if you compare it to 10 years ago, it was 150 companies when they did the same survey. And that's 50x the competition you have gotten in 10 years. And this is if you look at the trend, this will keep increasing. So it will be more and more hard to go heads-on because you have more competition. There is a second trend that I think is important why heads-on will be harder, and that's because everybody's getting better at building products and also selling them. When I quit Chalmers 10 years ago, we were actually one of maybe the 5th year having studied IT at Chalmers. So the educations are focused more on building software, especially web software is becoming more and more common. People just don't build UI that looks like this anymore and works like that. So the bar is higher, simply. There is a third reason also. Competitors usually have ecosystems today, especially the large ones. So this is the ecosystem of Google Workspace. And if you decide to compete with email against Google's mail solution, you don't only compete against their email solution, you compete against this ecosystem that they have tied into their email solutions. But not everything is bad. What I just said about the ecosystem is also an opportunity for you to actually not build everything they need. You can probably do your small niche and join another ecosystem, and that could help you avoid building some of the stuff. The global market for end user SaaS spending has also increased 4x since 2015. This is in billion US dollars. I'm not sure exactly how they counted, but they count somehow, and I think the trend is what's here, it's growing. So even if it looked really bad on the slides before, I don't think we should feel hopeless about it. But if you don't deliberately position your product, you likely end up going heads-on with the competition. You need to be a little bit explicit in how you are going to avoid that, if you want to avoid it. And I think it's better if you can. So what is really positioning and why does it matter? As I said, it's a little bit misunderstood concept, so I will first talk a little bit about what it's not. It's not your vision or not your strategy. Those are they come before positioning. Your positioning, if you find a really good one, might affect your vision or strategy. So everything goes in cycles, but in general, I would see vision and strategy that's something that comes first, and your positioning needs to fit with that. Then we have things like brand, messaging, marketing, and similar. That's not positioning either. That's things you do based on your positioning. So I hope this will get a little bit clearer when we go into some examples later. So April Dunford, which I spoke about before, she likes to explain positioning as it's the act of deliberately defining how you are the best at something that a defined market cares about. If I'm going to translate this a little bit, it's like being very deliberate about who you are the best for and why. And knowing that gives you a good advantage. So let's take some examples where it might not have worked so well. Oh, sorry, I skipped a little bit. So one important note first is that positioning is about here and now. It's very easy to think about what we want to be in the future. I would try to avoid that. And April also recommends that look at where you are now. You can always change this in the future. But you have sales goal to reach now, not in 3 years. And that also means that positioning is likely to change over time. If it's valid here and now, there might be another positioning that's the best one in a year or two. And that is driven a lot by that the competitors change, your strengths change, like you build new nice features or other build new nice features. And like the customers might change too. For example, we had fairly recently that mobile internet was available everywhere for almost everyone. Before that, you couldn't do like as much video marketing as before. Now you can do more video marketing because we have better bandwidth and so on. So you need to revisit your positioning quite often, and preferably it's part of your strategy, like we are here, we want to go here. So now we can jump into the examples that probably will drive home a little bit better what I mean with positioning. So at Bookio, like we have always thought that we wanted to have a bank account connected to bookkeeping because it speeds up a lot of things and we can guarantee that your accounting gets correct. So it's a really nice thing. Last year we got the chance to actually release this. We are not a bank though, so we actually don't get to call it bank, but we call it Bookio Business Account. And this was not very well thought through. We just had the baggage of thinking about this as a bank solution combined with your bookkeeping. So we picked something that sounded like that, as close as possible without breaking the law. The problem is that our solution, as it's not a real bank, it has a few limitations. For example, we can't receive Swish payments today. We can't receive foreign payments today. And payments generally take 1 day longer than if you have a normal bank account. In our case, like, it shouldn't matter so much for what the users would use this for, but because we have mentioned it as a bank account, even if we are clear about these drawbacks, people come in, look at it, and realize that this is not as good as my old bank. And they compare it to the bank, even if we clearly say that we don't have this, and they are disappointed. Not all, but a lot of customers think that this is not a good bank for me. Instead of focusing on the value it really provides, which is handling payments super easy directly from your bookkeeping, and you can even have our card here, and when you buy something in the store, you get a notification. You just snap the photo, like a photo of the receipt, and then you're basically done with that part. So there is a lot of value in this product, but just because we weren't careful enough with how we explained it to the customers, they see the drawbacks rather than value. And I can't tell you how good it will be when we have figured this one out, because we are in the middle of doing it right now. There is, of course, the possibility to actually solve these drawbacks that we have, but we could have mentioned it as something else first, maybe like book your payment services or book your pay. When you charge people for Stripe, you don't expect to have that money on your account the next bank day, and people are happy with that case. So just changing the context here would probably make a lot of difference. And I'm going to give an example from April where she actually had the same concept, but they took it all the way and made a huge difference for the company. And I think this drives home the big potential of getting this right. So she worked as VP of sales for a database company. They were a startup doing a database, and what their database could do that others couldn't do, they had like a patent for a certain calculation or a way to run a calculation that made it go in like 2 minutes instead of 3 days, which is a huge benefit in many cases. But that was really their only competitive advantage. So when they went around at sales meeting and like tried to sell this database to people, large companies, they were like, yeah, you know, we have Oracle, we have spent a lot of money on training, we have the infrastructure to run Oracle, what are you doing that Oracle doesn't? Please go. And this was like by slide 8, they got kicked out most of the time. And finally they got what she calls a pity sales call, which is basically your CEO knows someone who knows someone and they agree to meet you just to be polite to the CEO. And it was a banker and they were doing the same thing. And finally he's like, oh, this is awesome. We really need this. We will buy it right away. I was a little bit worried after a while. But then I figured out this is not a database. This is business analytics or maybe a data warehouse, but it's not a database. And you know, she's salesperson on a database company, and getting that from the customer in this meeting is a little bit upsetting that they are telling you that what you're selling is not what you're saying it is. But they actually went back and discussed this in the team, and because they were not selling very good, they took the chance to like, okay, let's try it out. Let's just change the messaging when we go on sales meetings. We are a data warehouse now. We don't change anything else, we just change the messaging. And suddenly they got a lot of sales meetings booked. They got through it. They didn't get kicked out at slide 8 anymore. They actually got sales that to a larger, they could sell it for a larger price than they could before, because a database was a commodity at this time, while a data warehouse was something quite new. And so like they sold more to a higher price, which is pretty good. The good thing is also when they figure out that this actually works, they could scrap half their product backlog. Because if you do a database, you need to consider like security, replication, scaling, backups, and all that stuff that you rely on in a production database. And I looked at some of the top database examples today, and they have like 120 features listed on their overview pages. As a data warehouse, you don't need all this. You need to focus a little bit more on the analytics side instead. So not only did sales go better, but they completely changed how the roadmap was, and they could save a lot of dev time. So I think getting that right, like that's positioning when it really matters. It's not the positioning statement that you just do and put away somewhere, but it's actually getting that edge over the competition. So there is one word in her that she mentioned, it's deliberately. Like I talked about getting a positioning by accident before, and it's important to not get into that position because things that happen by luck is generally not the best possible outcome. Most likely we'll be able to figure out something better if you put some time on it. And we actually did this too at Bookio. So as said, we have existed around 8 years. It's closer to 6 if you count when we started to do this full time. And our first idea was to do a SaaS company, basically like charge 100, 200 a month per customer, like all our competition do. But then we realized, okay, they have been existing for 15 years or 20 years when we started. We have a lot of catch up to do if we want to be able to explain to people why we are better. We thought we were much easier than that, but everybody says easy bookkeeping. So it's not really an advantage unless you have a really, really good way to prove that you are easier to them when you are trying to explain why you are better. Then of course it helps with the recommendations and so on, but that's a slightly different topic. So one of our co-founders was in the US on like a startup trip, and they figured out that, yeah, maybe we can go free. That should be a like differentiation against all the other competitors. And we started to look at the numbers, and the numbers looked really, really good. Like if you compare how much they spend on financial services, it wouldn't be too hard for us to just get some of that spending and like make a good deal out of this, even if we are free, given that we could get much more customers being free. So we went this way when we looked at it, and like for many, many years, the numbers have looked really good. Like they do spend this much that we thought about. If we can just capture it, then we will be in a good position. But one thing that happened, though, that we didn't really reflect about at that time is how much the customers changed when we went to free. Those who care about if your accounting software is free is generally like, or we have noticed over time that they are generally not those who spend on other things. Maybe because if you have no very small company, then being free matters a lot. Then you don't have so much money to spend. Or maybe it's not even active, then it's also very attractive that the software use is free. Again, they don't have any money to spend on other things. So we kind of got the wrong customers here to at least some extent, and we noticed then when we were trying to do altering our marketing message a little bit and removing the word free, we actually got more signups, and we actually got better customers too, a little bit larger and so on. So not super well thought through. Another problem with it is that it affected our roadmap. So because we didn't charge normally, like monthly fee, we needed to spend a lot of time on building solutions that would allow us to capture some of these financial services, like integrating to factoring or integrating to getting your invoices checked in an effective way and so. When we probably should have spent this time doing what's best for the majority of the customers to keep growing our customer base and helping them better. That said, I'm not sure I would change this if we go back. We are where we are, it's going quite well, so maybe it hadn't if we changed it. But the point is positioning changes everything. It changes how much your customers are willing to pay, who they are, what you build, and also how you sell it. But then the question is how do we do positioning in that sense? And this is again a slide from April's slides. And there are 5 unique components of positioning and a 6th bonus one, which is relevant trends. I'm actually not going to speak about that one today. But we have the competitive alternatives. And it's important to remember that for us, for example, as a bookkeeping solution, we might think other accounting software like Visma or Fortnox. But it's also the intern that can do it for them instead, if they hire an intern. It's the accountant. It might be actually shutting down your company, doing nothing instead. That's also a competitive alternative. Right now, when we have the bank solutions, banks are a competitor in one way. So to do this, you really need to think about the jobs to be done for the customer. Because if you know what they are trying to achieve, you can figure out what competitive alternatives there are to solving this problem. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. Then you have the unique attributes, which can basically be a feature, or it can be some capabilities. It could be something like we have on-site support if no one else has that. That matters for some people, not for some, but it might be unique in your case. And then you look at what values these provide for the customers based on those features. And then, of course, the target market characteristics. It's not the target market, which could be accounting software. It's more who cares a lot about accounting software with these features. And finally, we come to the market category, which in our case is more accounting software. But we could change it a little bit to be accountants. If we decided to do a solution where we take full responsibility of someone's accounting, then we are in the accountant market. And the pricing is basically 200 a month on one and 1,000 plus on the other. But you also need to work for each krona in that one. And yeah, these are actually like a circle again. If you change one, the others are affected. But if you try to do positioning, you need to start somewhere. And the recommendation is to start with the competitive alternatives. And a lot of that is because that's something you can't affect directly. It might change based on what you do in the others, but you can't tell the customer that, hey, I think you should focus about these jobs to be done instead, or it's not easy at least. So that's a very good reason to start with that one, and then it kind of flows after. So let's make this as a fictional example. So we have created a set of earbuds in our company, and we recently launched it. What's unique with these is that we have a patent for like some small material or technology that allows you to filter out a range of frequencies of sound extremely efficiently, like completely. And no one else has this, but we also didn't have the money to build like active noise cancelling. And we have to figure out these frequencies before when we build it. So it's not like you can just change it on the go when you hear other sounds. And it's not selling at all, or selling a little, but those who buy it returns it and give it like a 1 rating because it doesn't have active noise cancelling. Who wants to listen to music when all you hear is the children crying on the tram or like the noise of the tram? It's not a great product here. So can we save this by just repositioning it a bit? So let's start with the competitive alternatives. And this is a very crowded market with headphones in general. But you could not listen to music at all. And this is really the status quo competitive alternative. And for you who sell things, this is one of the most important ones to beat. Like, you need to convince them to get off the sofa and actually buy your stuff. And it's often easier to just, I can do it next week. And then you do it next week once more. So that's a real competitor for you. In this case, we can use earplugs or similar if you only want silence and not the actual music or podcast. There are other in-ears, like, every brand has their in-ears nowadays. And there is the over-ears too, with noise cancelling on both. So if we look at the unique features we have, it's like we have a total reduction of certain frequencies. No one else has that. We do not filter out other frequencies. I mentioned that as a drawback before, but it's unique. And what's unique might be an advantage if you shift the playing field. So let's keep it there, even if we think it's a drawback. They're cheaper to make because we don't need all that smart like noise cancelling algorithms. And in-ears take less space than over-ears. And what value does this give? So you can protect your ears in really noisy environments if it's that frequency. You can hear music even with that strong noise. And it allows you to hear things well around you, even if that noise normally would be a little bit overwhelming. Like, for example, you probably have tried to speak to the flight attendants on a flight, and if it's very loud sometimes, it can be hard to hear what they say. If you get rid of the flight sound, you would hear them much better. And they are cheaper to make, so which can make them cheaper to buy if we decide to not extend our revenue margins. And who cares about this a lot? And as I said, I have done a bit of cycling, so I happen to know as a cyclist, you're out on the road for many, many hours. It's nice to be able to listen to music or podcasts to get the time fly. But the problem is that you can't even get the volume high enough because the wind noise is so high, so you don't hear the music at all. And if you actually manage to crank up the sound enough, you don't hear the traffic. So you don't hear the car that's going to hit you in 2 seconds if you swerve. So most people don't bike with headphones because it's too dangerous unless you are in a very safe area. We might have and cyclists doesn't want the over-ears. It's really cumbersome with the helmet. So operators of construction machines, like drilling machines or similar, might also have the same issue, that there is one really high sound that they want to get rid of. But let's stick with cyclists for our case, because I think that's a good market characteristic. And for the market category, I think we stick with earbuds. The reason is we could put it as ear protection but then we would compete with earplugs and similar, and it explains what this thing does in a worse way. Because people will use this market category to figure out what does this do, and if we miss the music, then you wouldn't pay so much for it. Then I can just get the earplugs, basically. So I think this is the best category here. So if we think about our new positioning, that could be better in this case though. So we are earbuds for cyclists that want to listen to music safely while they're biking. And because we can remove the wind noise, but not the traffic noise, we can provide them with this. And I don't need to listen at a volume that actually hurts my ears. And can we charge more money for this? I'm pretty sure we can, because it's unique. No one else is doing this on the market. Cyclists has a lot of money. They spend like 40,000 Swedish on a bike if they are 40 plus men. So a good target if you want to have high prices. It's also a safety feature at the same time as it makes the user's life a little bit better. So it kind of is a nice gift for a loved one or so on. So you could imagine it being a Christmas gift or a birthday gift. Does it change your roadmap? Yes, again, like if you're going to bike with it, you probably want some sweat protection for it. You probably want some kind of action fit so it stays in the airs when you're moving around for a long while. And you probably want an earlier battery life warning than normally, because if you're going to be on the bike for 3 hours, it's a little bit annoying if you get the warning half an hour into it and it ends half an hour and you have 2 left. But we might not care so much about how it looks or how the actual battery life is. So we might not even care about if it's a headset or not. So we might not need a microphone if we go this way, because maybe they don't want to talk when they are biking. So the roadmap changes quite a lot from this. And I think this is another example of where you can take one disadvantage you have and make it an advantage in another setting. You basically cheated the system and played another game here. And think about positioning that way. So going to the other part here, like, so if positioning is this important, how can we make it better? And we had these 2 parts when we did the positioning, like the unique attributes and the value we provide. Generally, these require development to change. Like you need to build new features or, you understand. Like that takes time and it's expensive. So if you are strong in that part, you have much more options when you're going to pick the target market characteristics or the market category later. So if we can just make those nicer, then we are in a better position for the future. And, just making them nicer, sure, easy to say, harder to do. But I think there is like a trick here that a lot of product companies fail to utilize, and that's to like compete on user awesome rather than app awesome. So if you listen in to product people, they often think like, we are making this awesome app. I actually did it when I talked about our bank account. I talked about how amazing that is, not how amazing our customers can be when they use it. And most teams focus here, and I'll show you a little bit why I think it's better to focus on user awesome. So I do a bit of hobby photography, and I got this ad in my Facebook feed the other day. It's actually a video ad. So what they do is that they just quickly swipe over the sky with this preset brush, and going from a pretty bland and boring sky, it becomes really nice and interesting. And they just take a few seconds. They are not very precise, like they actually hit the edges a little bit. But for me, it's clear that, okay, with this solution, all my photos can be so much nicer. And like taking photos is a little bit, you want to share them with people, right? And you want people to like your photos. And I can see that, yeah, I think they would like this more. It will make me a better photographer if I can use this rather than what I'm doing today. The thing is, I can actually do this in post, but it will take me like 15 minutes per image, what they did in a few seconds here. So even if my solutions allow me to do this, they are too slow, so I don't do it. I'm not awesome because it's not efficient enough for me to do it. And if we look at the right here, we have like a made-up product backlog item to explain how to build this feature. And I think a lot of product teams would have something like this, like implement the XYZ algorithm and add a local brush tool. And maybe you have a use case statement, like as a user, I want to be able to apply changes locally to my image. And it's like, it's not very exciting, right, compared to what the ad shows me. And marketing got it right. They talked about what I want, not what the product are doing or the capabilities the product is doing. The problem you get when you talk about it this way is that people don't go all the way to make it really, really awesome. I can implement this by putting a button to this brush in the 5th settings page. no one will ever find this, but I might have completed my PBI. And for me, that's a little bit of a problem because it puts your whole organization in like just, we are building a product or a software, but we don't really care what the end result for the user is. And that's the wrong focus to me. If I'm going to give another example, like this ties back to jobs to be done. I really don't like the jobs to be done message so much, because what you really want is jobs to be done well most of the time. There are a few ones that you just want to get done and don't really care. But most of the time the users want to do it well. And like no one wants to make an investment. They probably want to make a great investment though. What great means is different from each person. Some just care about the money yield on the investment. Some care if it's in green tech or social like justice. Some maybe want to invest in Africa, some might not want to invest in Africa. But if you put that like making it possible to make a great investment, it's a little bit clear for the product teams that they need to figure out what makes it easy to do a great investment. It becomes your responsibility to help the customer for that, while in the first case here, you're like, yeah, you go and figure that out. We can just make sure that you can click this button and do the final step in this journey, but we don't take any responsibility for the first steps of the journey to figure out what you want to invest in. It's a very, very small shift, I would say, and it's not like, when you speak about it this way, it's like, yeah, of course we are doing this. But I think what's happening is, if we go back to this one a little bit, someone had that vision in the product teams. They thought about this. And then when they explained it, it became that one. Like, they didn't connect it for the rest of the organization about what is it that we are really trying to achieve for the user here. And then it becomes just technical, blah, 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 just do it. And you lose a lot of uniqueness and opportunity when you do like that. So in the most cases, this is not true for all software. For example, games is not very, like, when you are playing a game, it's more about playing the game than anything else. But in most utility software, your goal is to make them do something when they leave your software. In our case, for example, we make it so you can hand in your tax report, or you can send an invoice. The point is that the invoice gets to the customer and payment is done. If we take the investment thing, like, sure, they did the investment in our software, but the interesting thing is that they made an investment that they are making money on or are making a difference. So the most interesting thing happens outside of your app. So as an accounting software, we have an opportunity to have a lot of reports. It's very easy to go into this with the mindset that we are going to make the prettiest and most awesome reports ever. The problem is then, like, okay, so what are they going to use these reports for? So if you have, like, for example, a spending breakdown for your company, one thing you can use this for is to lower unnecessary costs. But if we just show them that you are spending 10% on toilet paper and like 20% on this and 30% on that, it's hard for you to understand is this 10% on toilet paper reasonable? Should I worry? Is it more or less than a competition? If we can explain what, for example, other companies in the same segment and size spend on toilet paper, then it's a little bit easier for our user to reflect on, oh yeah, this seems 3 times as high as everybody else. Maybe I should figure out what we are doing with this paper, or whatever. Like, Kate Sierra calls this post-UX UX, like what happens when you shut down the computer, and that's what really matters. And she also talks about this in another setting where it's about getting viral growth or getting growth, because usually people don't go around and tell people, like, maybe we do because we are in the product space, like, I found this amazing app, look here, it's cool. But it's more like, if we take the photographs, they share the photo and people see, oh, this photo is amazing. How did you get this? Or what are you using to get this? I'm also thinking about buying a camera. And they've seen the proof that what this person does is great. I want to get their advice on what they are using or how they get there. And that's a little bit stronger than just showing, hey, my product can swipe a little bit with a brush and it becomes cool. So again, like just to reiterate on this one, being stronger in values gives us more value options in this target market characteristics, which is a good thing. Because if you decide to slice and dice your market a little bit to get an advantage, it's important that that slice you take is large enough so you can reach your sales goal and it's enough for your company. Even if it's just a temporary thing, it still needs to be enough to reach the current goals in most cases. So if you have more options, you can combine markets, or you can decide to go for a larger one rather than the smaller one. So that's why I think that matters a lot in the long run. So I'm just going to summarize a little bit what we have talked about, and then we can do a little bit more questions. So very few things has the same potential to grow your company as a better positioning. We have looked at how it quite easily can transform everything when it comes to your sales and also your roadmap. Positioning requires continuous deliberate work and thought. It's not a do once and then keep the same for the life of your company. You want to be able to update it over time when you learn new things and so on. And provided value is what gives you options in who you target and how you frame your product. So having more options here is really good. And if your team focus on improving the user rather than the app, I think it will lead to more unique values quite quickly for you. It's not super easy though. We have tried this a little bit in our place and it doesn't click for everybody. A lot of people still get stuck on focusing on the app or making that report nice rather than solving a real problem someone has. One trick I used to do or do sometimes is trying to do the marketing thing here first. So when I start thinking about the product, I'm trying to figure out how would I market this? And if I don't have any good way to market it, it's probably not great yet. And maybe I can figure out something to make it great. I mentioned that a lot of this is based on April Dunford's talk about positioning. If this is something you feel that would be interesting to do, her book is one of the few that actually goes into how you do positioning. I talked about that positioning statement where you just fill in the blanks. The problem with that is that almost no one explains how you figure out what you should write in the blanks. And she does that. And she has done this for a lot of companies. She did it for 19 before she wrote the book and so on successfully. So that's good. And we have this link that I think will be in the live stream where she has a couple of talks at this conference that are free to watch live. And they are really, really educational, I think. She's also quite fun to listen to. And then we have Katie Sierra who talks about, she calls it minimum badass user. And that's what I talked about, making the user awesome rather than the app awesome. But she has 2 talks here about that too, if someone wants to hear that explained a little bit more in depth and from someone who has lived that a little bit more than I have. Yeah, so that's actually what I had to say around those things. So I think I would like to tie it up with some questions if people have. So, thank you. Exactly. You never know if it was completely understandable or if it was super clear when there is no questions.
You can everything, that's why there's no questions.
Yeah, I choose to interpret it that way. Yeah.
I'm too busy going fuck, I need to go home and do my homework now. No questions.
Yeah, we were.
Thanks for this, though.
Yeah, we were exactly the same thing. We have been going for a while, and we have realized that going heads-on is something we have done without thinking about it too much. And it has the potential to change everything. It's not super easy to do, especially for a broad product. If you are a little bit more narrow in what you do than we are with accounting software, which is basically salary, invoices, bank, accounting, and bookkeeping expenses, then it's easier to think about, I think. Yes?
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Well, first of all, thank you so much. I think you explained it perfectly. I just wanted to ask, did you do any changes in the team when you got to learn about this new positioning thing? Did you need to change anything, add someone, work in a different way?
The thing is that, like, we are in a progress of doing it. I think we have like, I never remember exactly how many employees we have now, but it's 80 plus something. So we have a lot of different capabilities in the company, so it's not too hard for us to move people around if we see that we need it. But as I just mentioned, we struggle quite a bit with being so broad that we are. So this has been much harder. It's fairly easy for us if we look at certain sub-modules, but when we look at the whole picture, we have a struggle with it. So we haven't got that far. But I do think that, I'm pretty sure that what we are talking about will probably change our roadmap quite a bit going forward. And we actually made the change from being free. We kind of removed that just a few months ago, where we started to charge more, or we still have a free tier, but it's not as massive as it was before. And that has allowed us to already scrap a lot of things that we just thought about doing because it could earn us money, not because it's really, really valuable to our customers. So we already see that potential on the roadmap by being a little bit more explicit here. Yes? Yeah. No.
Thank you for the chat, it was very interesting. I have a question though, when it comes down to understanding the user, and I'm very interested in this, like the bad ad user aspect of it all, do you have any examples on how you go through the process of talking to the users or the potential customers, right? Because I guess that's where it becomes, how do you figure out what they really need, what gives them value, and how do you turn that into actionable steps internally, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I see. So there were really two cases where I think doing a user research in this presentation come in play. One is when you talk about the competitive alternatives. And what we are doing right now and what April recommends is that you actually start asking people, what would you use if we didn't exist? But also you look at your most happy customers. And this is something you can't do day one because you don't have enough customers to do it. But when you have been running for a while, you can look at who are our happiest customer, what context did they put us in? Like what did they compare us to when they picked the solution? And what values do we give them? So that's for the competitive alternatives part a little bit to do that talk. When you look at the other part, which is more about like doing their jobs to be done really well, we have the luxury of having been company owners ourselves, so we kind of know a bit, but that's a real trap to go into, and we did that for a long time. We thought we know our customer base just because we had lived that life, but it's not the same. Like, you can't represent hundreds of thousands of customers. It doesn't work that way. So you really need to talk to them anyway. And I think we are doing a lot of user research right now, or we have hired people quite recently that's starting to do that. And it's amazing what you learn when you start to speak to people. And of course you have the two levels of it, which is just speaking to people and getting that qualitative feedback, which catches something. But then for decision making, you really need to look at the quantitative feedback, I think. It's very easy to get stuck with the person who screams the most otherwise and do things based on them. And that's not what you want to do. But those research is a good way to inform what you want to research more in the quantitative research, I think. Going back to that, like, user awesomeness, like the only really good tip I have is that think about the marketing, like how would you market this? What would get them to buy it? And then you can also start that conversation with them.
Right, it makes sense, and I'm a business coach for very early stage startups, and so this is really interesting to me on how can I help them with this aspect. And it almost feels like getting to know your user and getting to talk to them or your customer is a bit of a later stage thing, is there a way, or have you gone through or seen examples of early stages where maybe you barely have your MVP that you can start doing this?
Okay, so we actually started like being part of Chalmers Startup Camp. I don't know if people know about that. And these were some of the exercises to do there. And me and Victor, who's the CEO and one of the co-founders too, we were probably the worst at this part because we thought we knew this because we had been doing companies and I had my own company. So we were quite lazy. Like, of course, everybody has the same problems we have. But I do think that if I reflect on the other ones that did it well, they were just like, they just went out and talked to people who were in this situation. It's actually a little bit easier to talk with them before you have something in a way, because you can frame it more as research rather than help us be better than the others. You might get a few more honest answers when they don't know that you're already doing this. They will tell you more honestly about why this doesn't matter at all. I also think that, let's see, I've read a few quite interesting tips on this where this doesn't work in all cases, but in some cases you can actually charge people for getting to learn your customers. There was like one company that did they wanted to do benchmarking for large companies on, let's say, management consulting similar, so on how much they spent on internal admin and so on. What they did was that they called up companies and told you, yeah, if you pay us 10,000, we will audit this for you. And it was fairly cheap. They got 10,000 and they got to build their data set while people pay them to do it. They don't have great answers in the beginning, but they got enough data that they could provide answers after a while. So there are certainly hacks around it, but I think in most cases, I wish we talked more to users early on.
Thank you.
I think we're all set then. A big round of applause for Mikael once again.
Thank you so much.